Have you ever been in a fight where your mind just goes completely blank? You say things you regret almost instantly, or you just can't find the right words, and then hours later you think of the perfect thing to say? Well, I'm here to tell you that's not a character flaw. It's a biological event. It's a temporary shutdown of the most advanced part of your brain. And in this explainer, we're not just going to talk about the science behind this emotional flooding. We're going to give you a concrete physical protocol to actually reboot your system when it happens. The moment an emotion feels overwhelmingly intense, it stops being a subjective feeling and becomes a measurable physiological shutdown of your rational brain. You become, for a short time, incapable of logic, reason, or even basic communication. Now, that isn't poetry, it's neurology. Your brain is physically redirecting its resources, literally sacrificing higher thought for primal survival. We're going to show you the emergency protocol that addresses this very real, very physical crisis. So here's our game plan. First, we'll dive into the feeling that isn't, and talk about what this shutdown actually feels like. Then we'll pop the hood and look at your brain on high alert. We'll map out the cognitive shutdown itself and get into why thinking is impossible. Then, and this is the important part, we shift to the solution, the 20-minute emergency rule. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the key principle: regulate, then relate. All right, let's start with that familiar sinking feeling. Emotional flooding creates this really exhausting cycle, right? You have a communication breakdown, and then it's followed by this wave of regret. It always seems to happen in our most important relationships. During those conversations where we desperately want to connect, but instead, everything just spirals out of control. We can't process what the other person is saying, we can't articulate what we need, and suddenly, a simple disagreement escalates into a destructive fight or just a complete cold shutdown. And all of this leads to that one central, super frustrating question. Why does your rational brain abandon you at the exact moment you need it the most? It really feels like a betrayal, doesn't it? You're just left with this chaotic memory of the emotion, but no clear logical memory of how the argument even started. But this isn't a failure of your willpower. To really understand what's going on, we have to stop seeing it as a feeling and start seeing it as a physiological process. Okay, so this entire experience, it's all driven by your brain's ancient, hardwired threat response system. And when it hits a critical threshold, it triggers a cascade of events that are completely outside of your conscious control. It's not you failing, it's your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do to keep you alive. The only problem, it can't tell the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and, say, a critical comment from your partner. And at the heart of this whole system is something called the HPA-Axis. Just think of it as your brain's emergency broadcast system. When your amygdala, which is kind of like your brain's smoke detector, senses a threat, it slams the big red panic button. This activates the HPA-Axis, which then floods your entire body with this powerful chemical cocktail of cortisol and adrenaline. And listen, this isn't a subtle shift. It's an unmistakable signal to every cell in your body that says, emergency, prepare for battle, right now. And this chemical flood, it has a direct physical consequence. It's like an executive order from your survival brain to shut down all non-essential services. And when you're in a perceived life or death situation, guess what the most non-essential and energy-hungry service you have is? That's right, it's your rational, thinking mind. This slide right here maps out the entire shutdown loop. Let's walk through it. It all starts with a threat cue. That's what triggers the amygdala. That launches the HPA-Axis cascade, which is that chemical flood we just talked about. This leads to the most critical step of all, PFC deactivation. Your brain literally physically redirects blood and fuel away from your rational mind and toward your muscles. And the results? You fall back into a reactive default. With your higher brain offline, you can only access primitive habits, like yelling, withdrawing, or just stonewalling. Let's zoom in on that PFC deactivation for a second. Your prefrontal cortex, or PFC, is basically your brain's CEO. It handles logic, problem-solving, emotional regulation, pretty much everything that makes you, you. During a flood, this part of your brain is literally being starved of resources. So it's not that thinking clearly is just difficult, it's that the biological equipment you need for thought is offline. You are in a state of temporary but very real cognitive impairment. And this is how that vicious cycle gets locked in. With your PFC offline, you can't come up with a new creative solution. You can only access old, destructive habits. And why is that? Because as bad as they are for your relationship, they serve one crucial purpose. They briefly end that unbearable feeling of anxiety. That little bit of relief acts as a powerful reward, making you more likely to use that same destructive habit the next time you're flooded. So, if you have ever beaten yourself up for not being more rational in the heat of the moment, this section is for you. We're going to look at the hard biological reasons why simply trying to think clearly is a strategy that is absolutely 100% doomed to fail during a flood.
So here's the core issue. Your rational brain is the most metabolically expensive part of your entire body. It burns a huge amount of energy just to maintain logic and perspective. But a flooded brain is in a state of metabolic emergency. It makes a ruthless trade-off. It diverts all that precious energy away from the thinking brain and sends it to the body for survival. I mean, when you're facing a tiger, thinking is a liability, not an asset.
So what exactly gets shut down? Well, these are the cognitive casualties. First, you lose your theory of mind. That's the ability to understand that the other person has their own perspective. You literally cannot see their side. Second, you lose metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. You're completely incapable of recognizing your own irrationality in that moment. Third, your working memory is impaired. You can't hold two opposing ideas at once, like, I am furious right now, and I also deeply love this person. And finally, high cortisol levels actually inhibit your hippocampus, which means you can't even learn from the conflict.
Okay, that's the problem. And yeah, it's deep, it's biological, and it's incredibly powerful. But the solution is just as biological as the problem is. So now we're going to pivot from the why to the how. How do you stop this cascade and get your brain back online? Well, the key is to realize the solution isn't mental, it's structural. Let me say that again. The solution isn't mental, it's structural. You cannot think your way out of a flood because the part of your brain that thinks is offline. Trying to reason with yourself when you're flooded is like trying to run on a broken leg. You don't need better thoughts, you need a physical intervention. You need a structure to contain the emergency until your body can return to its baseline. And here is the magic number, 20. It takes a minimum of 20 minutes for that flood of adrenaline and cortisol to clear out of your bloodstream. This is not a suggestion, it's a biological fact. Until those 20 minutes have passed, your thinking brain literally cannot get the fuel it needs to function. Any attempt to re-engage before then is absolutely guaranteed to fail. So here it is, the 3-step emergency protocol. Step 1, recognize the threshold. You have to learn your body's early warning signs, a racing heart, shallow breathing, maybe your fists clenching. Step 2, implement the pause. This means a non-negotiable, mandatory 20-minute timeout. You physically leave the situation. Step 3, decouple physiologically. You don't just wait around, you actively do something to reset your nervous system.
And that brings us to our final and most practical section. How do you actually use that 20-minute pause effectively? This is where you shift from being a victim of your biology to an active manager of it. The principle is so simple. You must regulate your own physical state first before you can ever hope to relate to another person.
The mechanism for this reset is called a vagal nerve activation. The vagus nerve is the main highway of your parasympathetic nervous system. That's the rest and digest system that basically acts as the brakes for your fight or flight response. By consciously activating this nerve, you send a direct physical signal to your brain that the danger has passed and it's safe to stand down. And the most direct way to do this is with your breath.
Let's actually try it right now. The technique is called paced breathing. It starts with the inhale. So wherever you are, just take a slow, deep breath in through your nose for a count of 4. Ready? In, 2, 3, 4. Now just hold that breath for a moment. And here comes the crucial part. Exhale slowly through your mouth for a count of 6. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That longer exhale, that's what physically stimulates the vagus nerve. It is the biological off switch for the panic response. Repeating that simple cycle for just a few minutes during your 20-minute pause will dramatically speed up your recovery.
This quote really reframes the whole problem, doesn't it? In the middle of an intense conflict, you're not dealing with a psychological issue of willpower or communication skills. You are dealing with a temporarily brain-damaged person, and that person is you. Your inability to think clearly is a neurochemical reality. Seeing it this way totally removes the shame and replaces it with a clear, almost medical-style protocol. And that really brings us to the ultimate takeaway. True emotional mastery isn't achieved by gritting your teeth and trying harder to think rationally. It's achieved by having the wisdom to recognize when your thinking brain is offline and then having the discipline to use a structural, physical intervention to bring it back. The smartest, strongest, and honestly, the most loving thing you can do in a fight is to recognize the flood and physically walk away for 20 minutes. So we'll leave you with this question. Just think about all the energy you've lost to destructive arguments, the connections that have been frayed, the regret that has lingered. What could you build in your relationships, in your work, in your life, if you learned to recognize the storm on the horizon and had a clear, simple protocol to stop the flood before it ever even starts?